Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the second part of the Energetics webinar on energy and water benchmarking. My name's Amanda Carter, and I'm from AMPC, looking after capability, extension and education. With us today, we've also got Matt Deegan, our Sustainability Manager, who will be available during the session. Your presenters today are Phil Shorten, Management Systems and Stakeholder Engagement, and Roger Horwood, Engineering Advisor from Energetics, who has worked on several AMPC projects over the past 20 years. Just a couple of housekeeping rules before we start. The webinar is being broadcast, so if anyone does need to jump off at all, you can we can send you a link so that you can catch up later, or if you want it to be able to send it around within your organisation, we can organise that as well. If people can just mute their microphones when they're not speaking, that would be fantastic. We've set everyone up as a panelist so that we can have an interactive session. Unfortunately, this isn't probably the most user-friendly program for that. I do notice we've got a couple of people, Gabby, Greg, Jenna, and Peter, that have all logged on just as an attendee. So you actually can't speak at the moment. I'll re-forward you the information so that you can come in as a panelist if you wish. Otherwise, you'll just be in listen-only mode. And if you want to ask questions, there's a question bar that you can do if you're not going to come in as a panelist. So, Phil, I will hand it over to you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar session. This is the second one, so I believe most of you were at the first session. And in this second session, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the opportunities that the actual benchmarking tool may have provided you, illuminated for you. But we're also going to have an open forum. So there's an opportunity to really talk about any opportunity, any sort of energy issue or energy project that you might be thinking about at your sites. So it's not just about the benchmarking tool today. Roger Horwood from Energetics is joining me, and Roger, some of you may know him. Roger's been around a long time, haven't you, Rog? He's a pretty modest guy. He's actually has a 30+ years experience in the energy management space, and mainly in the area of industrial sites. So very familiar with red meat processing sites, abattoirs, and so really an opportunity to quiz him today and use use his experience to help you further your projects and further your ideas. Yeah. So and something else I think we should highlight is that after this webinar, there's an opportunity for you to, as part of this process, an opportunity to send us emails, give us a phone call. We're happy to help with questions you may have about your projects or about your energy ideas. Now, as Amanda said, we're going to have an open forum a little later. So it's pretty important, I think, that we just sort of very quickly check in with everyone. So if you'd like to switch on your mics, so we can just say good day and find out a little bit about what you're thinking about at the moment in respect of energy at your sites. And as I said, later on, we'll have an open forum and go into a bit more detail. Our purpose today, as I mentioned, is to share with you some of these opportunities and to really help you progress your ideas, help you progress the business case or your projects, depending on where they are in the development process. So we'll revisit the tool initially. We'll go back to the tool. We'll have a look at that, revisit some of the highlights around that tool, and then Roger will provide a bit of an overview of some of the more common abattoir-specific opportunities, and then we'll get to the open forum. So before we move on, as I said, if you'd like to just switch on your mics, we might kick off with Carl, because I know Carl. How are you, Carl? You there from Tees?
Yeah, I am. Hi, Phil. Just managing my phone noise and mutes and stuff. I'm really well, thank you.
Good, mate. Carl, can you just share with everybody what you do at Tees and if there's any particular current projects that have motivated you to join this webinar perhaps, or any ideas running around in your head at the moment that you're grappling with?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so my role at Tees.
Really well, thank you. Good, man. Carl, can you just share with everybody what you do at Tees and if there's any particular current projects that have motivated you to join this webinar perhaps, or any ideas running around in your head at the moment that you're grappling with?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, so my role at Tees.
Oh, hang on a minute.
Can you just share with everybody what you do at Tees and projects that motivated you to join this webinar?
If you could just hang on a sec, Carl, sorry to interrupt, but there's we're getting a lot of interference with your audio. Sorry, mate. Switch it off. Just hang on a sec, Carl, sorry to interrupt. Carl, if you can hear me, we need you to just hang in there, mate, because your audio is completely distorted, I think. You might have a phone nearby that's distorting it. Oops. Right, thanks, Carl. Sorry, mate. Your audio has gone a bit off the beam there. So we'll come back to you. It may be your mobile phone or something like that that's causing some challenges there. So we'll come back to you, Carl, because initially it sounded okay.
I feel like I just jumped back on. I don't know what happened then. I just disconnected because it was kind of doing loops.
Oh, it's good
now.
now. Yeah,
cool.
mate, it's clear. Yeah, great. Sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so my role is Group Manager, Resource Efficiency and Sustainability for Tees Australia. So I work out of Group Support Services or corporate. So I'm responsible for energy, water, greenhouse gas emissions across our portfolio of 6 abattoirs on the eastern seaboard. In terms of my or joining this conference, yeah, just interested to see how everyone's going with benchmarking. I think in particular, kind of with an industry hat on, it's really important that we all track our progress to being, as we decarbonise and get better at doing things. I think collectively it's just important that we continue to capture that data and drive down, things like CO2 intensity per tonne of product and just get more efficient and more renewables into our system. Thanks, Phil.
Sure. Okay, thanks for that, Carl. All right, so that's great. So supporting the industry-wide adoption of this particularly benchmarking tool and the utilisation of the results. All right, thanks, mate. Jenna, Commercial Manager at Gundagai Meat Processing. You there, Jenna? Hello, Jenna.
Phil, I don't think you're about to hear Jenna. She's on as a attendant. Not
Okay, all right. Yep. Sorry, Jenna, you might have to switch your mic off, please, Jenna, if you do have it on, because it's not coming through clearly. It's good to know for later on in the open forum. That's good. We're testing this out now. Sean, you're with AMPC. Can you enlighten us as to your motivation for being on this webinar?
Phil, I don't think Phil's joined us yet.
Okay, sorry. I thought I heard him earlier on. Must have been someone else. All right, then, just very briefly, Gabrielle from Fletcher's. Gabrielle, are you there?
Yeah, this is indeed. So if you can start, see everyone. I know Jenna's now on as a so Jenna Gibbs from GMP.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that, Amanda. Okay. Looks like we're going to have a bit of a challenge with the open forum later on.
Bill,
Yep.
I think it might be best if we get everyone to mute for the moment, and we'll continue on with the presentation and see if we can.
Right. Well, we attempted there to get a little bit of feedback from everyone to so that we could test out whether the open forum a little bit later is going to be feasible.
Challenging.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's going to be a bit challenging. Perhaps we'll work on that in the background as to how we can clean that up. But the audio obviously is not coming through in an audible manner. So we'll move on and we'll stick to a more traditional format, see how we go a little bit later, and we may be able to gather your questions using the question function on the GoToMeeting. Alrighty, so let's move through then to an overview of the tool. So we'll just revisit the tool, have another look at it as planned. So the tool really comprises of inputs and outputs, and the inputs you can see here now, the benchmarking tool, and I think a couple of things to highlight. You'll notice the facility data there. So when you enter that data, it's very important that you really give that some thought, because depending on your answers, the results will reflect the type of site that you are working in or working from. So it's quite important that you get those responses in the yes/no format pretty clear, and then move on to the production data. Now again, you'll notice that we've got the capability in the tool to accommodate some default weights for various species, but of course you can also put your own weights into the tool. Notice the dark green versus light green. The dark green are really compulsory fields, so make sure that they have got a number in them. And if you want to add more specific data, you can using the light green fields. Moving from production data into product flow variations, again, very important from an energy point of view that we recognise the different types of sites. And alluding to what Carl mentioned earlier, when we're looking at benchmarking, it's quite important that we're comparing apples with apples. And so the types of sites, the types of processes at those sites are if you like, cleaned out in those comparisons, and we can actually compare sites that have a significant amount of boning out, for example, versus sites that don't, and similarly chilled product versus frozen product. So again, those kinds of percentages, those kinds of numbers are important, that you really do get those in. Now, having said that they're important, you can start with round figures if you don't have those exact numbers. Start with some round figures and play with the tool. And as you refine your numbers, you can refine, the tool will refine the results, obviously. But as we move down in consumption data, you'll see just very briefly there, all the different types of sources of energy, the different, and water. And so again, putting in those tons, gigajoules, if you know them, etc. And the idea being dark green, compulsory, get those in if you've got the numbers. But if you know your annual spend, you can stick those in. If you don't, the tool will use those default rates. And then over to the right, you can see investment decision data. Now, really important, as we mentioned in webinar 1, the investment decision data. We know that generally speaking, 2 to 3 years is a very common kind of level that people are looking for in terms of return on investment. But again, it depends a little bit on who you're talking to and what sort of projects you're talking about. So if you want to see more strategic projects referred to in the results, lift that up from 2 years, maybe up to 5, and you'll see a lot of strategic, more capital intensive type projects popping out in the results page. But if you want to stick to that 2 year or even 1 year, sure, means that a lot of the results will be the lower capital type projects, more housekeeping, swapping out low tech technologies within your site. Okay, so play with the numbers, see what sort of results you get. And then the benchmarking results, that's a preliminary sort of quantifiable result there. And what that does is that's a bit of a check, a sanity check. You have a look there, look at your usage per tonne, your unit cost rate. If you think that sounds about right, then you've probably completed the inputs correctly. If it's way off target, somewhere along the line, you may have missed something or put an extra zero somewhere or said yes to rendering when in fact you don't, or something like that. Okie dokes. So once you've entered all of that data, hit the link, progress to output report, and then the results come up. And there they are, the benchmarking tool report. And you'll see that dial, which clearly indicates where you sit relative to best practice. And you'll notice the best practice in this particular case is around about that 180 kilowatt hours per tonne of hot standard carcass weight. A pretty poor performance is up around that 520. This site in particular has come up with a pretty strong result, high performance, and therefore the tool tends to sort of defer to the more strategic projects because it's assuming in a sense that a lot of the low hanging fruit has already been ticked off, and hence why the site is performing so well. We might just have a look at that dial and how the dynamics of that dial with Roger. Roger, are you there? Are you okay to show us an example?
Just have to get out of that mode and get into this mode. But essentially, this is the spreadsheet itself. Can everyone see that now? Everyone's muted, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll just have to assume they're there, Rog.
All right, we will. So this is the spreadsheet as it works, and as we said, we can go into the facility data and pick what type of things we actually operate. So this one here, paunch processing, do you do it or not? And you can select it, and then you can basically go that way. If I go down to the bottom here, say for freezing, and take that one to a no, you'll notice that over this side, this balance between freezing and chilling has been taken away, but we'll put it back again. And we can see that it's come back again, the chilled tonnes versus the frozen tonnes. Very important element, actually. You take away the freezing load within a red processing plant, and you take away a big chunk of the electrical load because of the refrigeration required for freezing. So essentially, by putting the right type of facility that matches your facility, the right levels of production within this area here, you can actually get a very good result. I might just test the idea of actually increasing the amount of energy on this particular site. If we, for instance, said that there's 750,000 kilowatt hours of energy, we make it say 1, 2, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3. That's about it. We've increased it a lot. And we'll notice that we now have a fairly high electricity benchmarking value. And if we go to the output report now, we'll see that in the electricity side of things, and we just go down to the electricity one, we see that it's operating at a sort of a fair level. So it's not operating very well at this stage. Whereas if we go back to the input sheet, just move this across. There we go. And we go back to inputs, and we move that back to where it was before. One too many zeros there. Back to 750,000, and we go back to the output again, and we find in the electricity it's now at a good level. So essentially, that by adjusting the various variables within the input page, you can adjust where your benchmarks are, and that will in turn allow you either to select other types of opportunities or basically show you where you are on your benchmarking level. So
Roger,
I think,
could you? Sorry, mate. Yep. I was just going to say, could you also do the investment decision data just to sort of demonstrate the list of opportunities, how they change?
Yep. So for instance, if we've got 5-year payback there at the moment, so that's going to let a lot of the longer term projects in. If we put, say, 2-year payback in there, and we'll go back to the outputs again, and we'll go down to the electricity again, and we'll note that this hasn't selected any opportunities in this particular case, because most of the opportunities that would be applicable to the electricity at this stage would be greater than 2-year payback. And if we go back to the inputs again and put in 5 years, and we go to our outputs and we look at electricity again, we now see that we've got solar in there, biomass boiler, even the idea of a wind turbine if it's possible. So essentially that's the way this tool is working. Any further things to test there, Phil?
No, I think that gives us a fair,
so basically you can play
overview of the highlights.
You can adjust a few things and make sure that you're comfortable with the way it's producing the results for you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's close that down, or let's leave it there for the moment if anyone wants to have a play with it later. And put this back into presentation mode. And we're through that bit. We've done the tool examples, and this is actually that the savings pyramid is the basis for the tool, is the fact that in the first level, or the fair level, you're actually in the housekeeping mode. As you get up to good, you move up through the efficiency ones, and the final mode is when you're starting investing in more strategic projects like renewables and cogeneration.
Okay.
So
terrific.
Phil?
Yeah, so AMPC, as we mentioned in the first webinar, is really here at the moment, working with Energetics to support you along the way. There's the webinars, there's also the benchmarking tool, as I mentioned, the one-on-one follow-up calls, emails, and a library of fact sheets. Now, the links to that are being reviewed at the moment. There's some additional fact sheets being added to that. So very soon you'll be able to click through on the links that are on the tool, and you can, for example, go and explore in a lot more detail information about heat recovery, about solar, about optimizing your boiler, whatever the case may be, and some detailed information about building the business case, for example. So those fact sheets are, worth having a look at, I think, and provide a great library. And as Matt had mentioned in the first webinar, there's also the PIP projects, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later on. A couple of you I know in the group at the moment have already capitalised on PIP projects, and AMPC is very keen that the industry takes up the opportunity to utilise the money that's set aside from the memberships to be utilised for those projects. So a little bit more info on that in a momento. Now, before we get on to the next section, which is looking at opportunities in a bit more detail, we might just try the questions again if we could. So if anyone's got any questions, let's just try the audio again. Flick your mic on, and just if there are.
All right. Can you hear me, Phil?
I can.
So
Okay.
Phil, there was a question that came through from Cam Ferris. Can you clarify the wastewater criteria?
Okay. That's yep.
Yep.
So if anyone wants to ask a question, you've got a little microphone and it should be red at the moment. If you click on it, it should turn green and you should be able to speak and ask your question.
And hopefully that audio is improved. The criteria, Rog, I mean, we're talking similar to the energy, aren't we? It's the pyramid itself.
Yes, essentially we measure the amount of water being used per tonne of hot standard carcass weight. That's the benchmark for the water use. There's no specific criteria around things like BOD or other components of the wastewater itself. That's sort of built into the opportunities. When you read the opportunities, it may say that you should be looking at opportunities potentially to do perhaps anaerobic digestion if you're looking at your wastewater. There may be, in fact, some opportunities in there, I think, at looking at the way in which you treat your wastewater. But I'm not quite sure what other criteria we would be looking for.
we can have a look at that list of opportunities in the water section of the tool a little bit later when we're again when we're in open forum. I just heard an audio then, but it wasn't very clear. Sorry. Yeah, sounds like someone's trying to talk to us, but it's not clear. So we might have to switch off again the mics and move on. Okie dokes. So we can see here we're here as it is an ongoing project. It's not just a webinar. We are here to help, and so please take advantage of that. Flick us an email with a few questions. We'll share our email details, or just send them through to Amanda, and she'll pass them on. It's probably the best thing to do right at the moment.
Phil and Roger, it's Ken Pearson from Hillside.
Yeah.
I'm just in relation to the wastewater criteria, specifically, what is it asking when it talks about wastewater? Meaning, is it asking that we're discharging wastewater to municipal or and associated costs, or is it simply saying how much tonnage or whatever you're discharging to your own wastewater system?
Yes, that's a good question. I need to probably look at the spreadsheet once again just to understand what we actually asked for, but I seem to remember that we're mainly looking at the water use itself. Just let me quickly get out of this mode again.
So we'll just go back to the tool and have a look at that specific item now. So good question. That's the type of thing we want to discuss.
Yep. Basically, we're assuming this wastewater would be discharged to exterior, to either to a sewer system or somewhere else. That's the assumption in this case, but it's really what we're trying to capture there is the amount of cost that you have associated with the wastewater discharge. Does that clarify that, Campbell?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks for that. Any other questions, guys? About the tool?
I see John.
All right, let's move on, I think, Roger. We'll move on with opportunities, and then we'll again open it up again, see how we go. So it seems like some of the audios are working, which is good. I think, so now it's probably time that we move on to an overview of some of the opportunities. So as mentioned in the pyramid, we have behavior change, we have changes in technology and process, and then we move to the top of the pyramid with cogeneration and renewable type energy solutions. So Roger is just going to take us through now some of those examples, and it's just by means of getting the conversation started really, and maybe clarifying some of the opportunities that are expressed in the tool, just giving you some additional detail. And as I said before, it's really to encourage you to share with us the ideas that you've got at the moment, or any questions you've got around some of these opportunities that you're currently working on. Over to you, Rob.
There's John there, John Greeny. John? It's just he's got a green mic. I just wanted to see whether or not he was wanting to ask a question. Yeah, that's the one that's not coming through.
Yeah, John. Yeah, we're seeing it on the tool, on the panel, that you've got your mic open, but we're not hearing you. So, John, you might have to switch your mic off and get some questions through to Amanda.
So, Phil, another question comes through from Mohammed asking, what are the standard or reference values to develop this benchmarking tool?
We incorporated a lot of information from various studies done across quite a number of Australian red meat processing plants, and we used some of the reports from the AMPC to help establish some of the benchmarking information. And then we modelled the energy and water use on a unit basis, so basically on a process unit basis. So we modelled how much water you would probably use in a stockyard, how much water you would use in the, let's say, cleaning processes. All of that modelling was done across the process, and the same for the energy, for both in the fuel and also in the electricity use. So what we come up with at the end of it is we used all the best performance levels we could find in the industry, and we established them for each one of those units. So that when you go into your facility data that we were showing before and you select each of the units, you're actually selecting for the units that are in your process, but each one of those has already got a best performance or a good performance level indicated on it. So when you put your data in, it actually assesses you in that way. And then basically that's how we get the outcome. Does that make sense?
Hopefully. Mohammed, you're unmuted at the moment. If you wanted to further that question along, you could unmute if you wish. Not at this stage, I don't think, Rog, so I think we probably move on.
All right.
So just forgive me, guys, Cam Ferris once again. With the model, thank you for that. I became extremely alarmed when using the model, surprisingly good alarmed, on two areas, in particular water usage and electricity usage, to the extent that I'm quite surprised that it's that good. And I'm questioning the, I guess, the benchmarking itself, because I'm not, forgive me, I'm not questioning the accuracy or anything. I'm just questioning whether I've actually used it correctly, perhaps. And so my question really is, do you have a documented or reported, or perhaps I can do that separately, whereby if I told you all my inputs, you could literally tell me, and I guess this is what the tool is doing. But for example, I'm looking at, I don't mind sharing with this plant, or one plant we have. We're looking at 92 kilowatt per ton of hot scale carcass weight usage for electricity. Now,
that's very low.
That's extremely good based on the window.
Yes.
Right, based on the model. And similarly with water, I'm looking at 6 kilolitres of per ton of hot scale carcass weight. Again, very good. And I typically would I typically use around about 160 litres per animal of throughput. But I guess I'm wanting to know, is that what others are seeing, or am I mean, basically, am I inaccurate? Is really what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah. I tend to think that they could be accurate. That's not a problem. It may be in the way in which we've set up the modelling for this facility data, that it hasn't captured all of the things that you do or don't do. And what it may do is it's not quite taking into account everything that the way in which you operate. Does your site have rendering?
No, and I've selected that. I've selected that as a none on site. I mean, I've followed, which is part of the reason why I asked the wastewater question earlier, and I've looked at the rationale of the inputs, and inputted what I felt was a fair assumption. It's accurate. But what I might be, rather than take up time with the panel, perhaps if I communicate maybe directly via email or phone call afterwards.
Not a problem. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
That's exactly what we want to hear. I mean, that's that's that sort of sanity check, Cam. So that's excellent. That's the sort of feedback we want. And if there's some gaps in the data, either through the design of the tool or just things you forgot to include or thought they were excluded from a particular category, they're the sort of things that we really want to follow up on with people, because if we are using this data to help uncover opportunities across the sector or across subsectors, then it's really important that we're getting that constant feedback on the sanity of the results. So thanks for that, Cam. Great. Any other questions? If there are, please include them in the text box, and Amanda will capture those and or send her an email direct, and we'll continue on. So you can see there the energy savings pyramid, really useful tool. We got a lot of positive feedback when we were piloting this benchmarking tool across various sites, and it just really helps people put things into perspective, particularly the idea of really looking at your housekeeping, pulling down your total load before you start looking at the renewable solutions. For example, if you're going to solar, why not get your load down so that you buy less panels, basically? It's that kind of simple logic. Okie dokes. So let's move through now and just look at some classic energy and water opportunities. Well, mainly energy we're focusing on today. Opportunities that are available to sites. So Roger, would you like to take us through some of those common opportunities, please?
Yes, thanks, Phil. The first one that we'll look at is just the very first one we were talking about before was housekeeping. That's at the bottom of the pyramid. And really that makes up a whole lot of different things that you would do around a site. Things like reducing compressed air leaks, maintaining and eliminating steam leaks, automation and training, and looking at basically all the simple things that you can do. They're fairly low cost, and they actually have a very big impact sometimes in the amount of energy you can use. Just doing all of these things properly, I've seen plants reduce loads, their overall site loads by 10%, just doing these things properly. So it is worth having a look at the way in which you manage your housekeeping. And really, one of the things that we've found is you really get to the point where this becomes something you do on a regular basis, maybe as a checklist. And I can remember with some of the plants I've looked at where a checklist was made up and it actually was used every night, just to see whether everything was switched off, make sure everything was working appropriately. And it has a very big impact on reducing energy and water use within the site.
Thanks, Roger. So some of these things might appear a bit basic, but they still require a bit of effort and maybe a bit of change. I mean, what are the tips, Roger, that you would give in terms of getting housekeeping implemented?
Very first thing would be to make sure that you understand how well your plant's operating and where those housekeeping opportunities might be. So really, you've got to do a bit of a walk around with all of the people and on an ongoing basis, keep collecting those ideas from people. That can be through team meetings. It could also be through just basically someone having a walk around the plant and looking to see where energy is being wasted or it's not being looked after effectively. And gradually build your checklist so that when the checklist is there, you can just drop your way through it every day or every week, depending on how you want to manage it, and then continue.
Okay. So really, with these checklists, what you're talking about is really just integrating these types of energy and water saving opportunities into your standard operating procedures or practices, etc. Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people have been through this process before, so I think that's probably the most effective way of doing it, is to involve a whole lot of people in this exercise.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit like, we've said it many times, it's a little bit like safety. It's a little bit like, other environmental initiatives. It's a campaign approach, isn't it, in some ways? Now, what about, speaking of campaigns, what about the sort of classic switch off campaign?
Right, yes.
What are your thoughts about that? Because that's a common, it is a common, opportunity that people implement and have for many years.
Well, switch-off campaigns work to begin with. They work very effectively to begin with, but they tend to, over time, they lose momentum. And I've just put here a poster that I gathered from another group, actually called, not in the red meat processing, it's a group called Simplot. They food processing plants are in Australia, and you can see that they've made up a bit of a fun poster. This actually was more designed for their American operations. So you can see it has that sort of, that wanted poster sort of feel to it, of a more an American type feel to it. But it's got a list of things that they're looking at: leaving lights on, leaving motors running when they're not needed, leaving computers on overnight, leaving freezer doors open. These are all the things that are part of the bad energy gang, for instance. So there was made a bit of fun of it. This did work. It was a very good campaign. They had about 5 or 6 of these different processes, depending on what you were talking, whether it was energy, whether it was water, whether it was to do with other aspects of energy use. And but it did lose momentum, and essentially now they've got different types of programs working. Really, this is a good way to get it going, but really what you've got to move towards is embedding these energy saving and water saving activities into your operational and maintenance procedures, and where you can, automate it. Put some automation in play.
Okay, terrific.
So,
yeah,
I wonder at this point, has anyone else run a campaign? Is anyone that's on listening at the moment ran a campaign before?
Yeah, Roger, it's Carl here. Yeah,
Hi,
a few years ago. Hi. Yeah, just an example. A few years ago, we ran a campaign across the group, led by our site GMs, just ensuring that everyone at the end of shift was vigilant and going around and the simple stuff like turning off conveyors and all those small things that add up. And yeah, just like you say, that was effective for a time, and sites that may have better or worse culture than others, you definitely see that sort of peter out over time until it's re-established and there's some firm direction from management to pick it up again. So yeah, we've done the same, just trying to automate where we can, and trying to be vigilant and maintaining that messaging and just keep going at it. Otherwise it does disappear amongst the busy lives of people on plant.
Well, thanks, Carl. That's a good feedback. As we always know, they have an impact. It's really hard to hold it though. So you've got to automate or put it embedded in your systems to make sure it continues on.
Okay, moving on. What about metering, Roger? Metering's popular at the moment, isn't it?
It is. Energy and water metering and monitoring. Most sites will have access to the information they would get from utility smart meters in the form of either electricity or gas data. And in fact, water metering can also be achieved at the utility level. A lot of sites already put their own water metering in play, generally because water metering tends to be a bit cheaper to install than some of the other types of meters for electricity and gas. The idea with putting metering in play is that you basically want to measure those things where you think there's either energy waste or there's an opportunity to improve the efficiency of the operation. These meters should probably then be connected up into a SCADA system, which is maybe your existing plant SCADA system, or you can actually send them up into the cloud nowadays, put a little transmitter on the meter and send the information up into the cloud. And there's cloud-based packages that will actually accept this information and provide the energy management and water management type activities. One of the key things is that we need to have a business case for metering. So what do you think, Phil? Is that business case easy to do on metering?
Well, no. I mean, we've worked with hundreds of sites on metering as an idea, and only a few ever get up. And it's really the idea of attaching metering to some sort of outcome.
Yeah.
And you've got a few examples, I think, Roger.
Yeah. So I think the important thing is that when you put your metering into play, that it's better to put it in when you're doing something new or you're updating a piece of the plant, putting a new switchboard in. You might actually put some kilowatt hour meters in. If you're putting a new boiler in, you install it with a gas and a steam flow meter. That's an easy way to get the metering to be part of a bigger investment, so it doesn't have as much impact in terms of trying to understand whether or not you can develop a business case for it. You develop it as part of that project.
Now you've mentioned, sorry, just to interrupt there, Roger, you've mentioned
bottom-up type approach. Sorry?
I was just going to say, you've mentioned boilers, but what would be the sort of top, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 areas that you typically would meter? I know it depends a little bit on your purpose, but what are the common bits of gear?
The most common are that you would measure refrigeration for sure, because it's your biggest electrical load on the site. You would measure the steam flows most likely within the system, particularly if you have rendering. You would measure steam flows to see how effectively the steam's being used. You'd also probably measure some of the hot water recovery, particularly once again, if you've got rendering, you've got a lot of hot water generation. But even on any site, there is a lot of cleaning to be done and a lot of hot water generation. So you might measure the steam, and sorry, it might be steam or it might be actually purely hot water, depending what type of site you have. So those are the sort of areas where you'd focus your effort, but you'd also probably look at the performance levels of the freezers and chillers, and seeing that they're being held to particular temperature levels. They're not losing energy, for instance. There's many areas that you'd want to measure, but the reality is you're probably going to focus on the big ones: refrigeration and steam and hot water.
Now, you've mentioned at the bottom of the slide there, top down versus bottom up.
Yeah, there's a couple of ways of designing energy metering and monitoring systems. The first one is to say, well, what do we really want to report on? What are the things we want to know about? Do we want to know the KPI for the boiler performance or the rendering performance? Do we want to know how well the refrigeration system's being used in terms of amount of energy being used per tonne of frozen product, for instance, or per tonne of chilled product? So you want to basically design what are you going to report on, and where's that report going to go? Is it going to go to the CEO? Is it going to the board? Is it going to operational people? How is it going to be used? So that's designing it from the top, and then saying, once we've designed that, well, what metering do we need and what systems do we need to create those reports and those KPIs and performance indicators? The bottom-down approach, or bottom-up approach, sorry, is essentially the way we described before, where you include meters in your projects and you gradually start building a range of metering available, and then you gradually pull that up into the central SCADA system or a cloud-based system, and you use that to report on. So it's basically, there's two ways of doing it. They're both quite effective, but at some point you really want to do an assessment of what you really need. What are the true KPIs you want to report on?
Okay, now we're getting pretty close to time, so I just want to do a time check with you, Amanda, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy for you to finish off just after 3 if that suits everyone else, and if anyone needs to leave, they can just opt out, I think.
Yep, for sure. All right then. So we're now moving into the open forum space. Roger, there wasn't any other things you wanted to mention, was there, before we move into?
We just wanted to talk about a few things to get the juices flowing in terms of understanding opportunities and what they might be. I'm quite willing to talk about any opportunity that someone might be interested in.
Well, look, can I just say to anybody that's participating out there, so the likes of John and Jenna and Michael and Mohammed and co, feel free to interrupt at this point. Okay, so don't feel like it's not appropriate. Very happy. So Roger will just sort of continue on with a few other common opportunities, but just hit your mic, interrupt, unless there's any questions right now that people would like to share through their mics. Otherwise, we'll continue on just for another 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah, hi guys, Cam Ferris here, Hillside once again.
Yes,
one of the queries I have is in terms of going through our processes. We installed a small solar farm last year, or completed it late last year. So it's been going well. One of the issues I have with the provider, and I'm just wondering if it's the provider or whether it's the industry, is there's this rhetoric that comes out that says, you know, here's your wonderful payback and go with us and whatnot. And so we've done our due diligence, we've gone with that. Then with the relationship, there's a disconnect between the solar provider and our energy provider. And my biggest issue is I'm promised a load that is presented to the plant on a daily basis. We had some teething issues with what some of the banks were producing, and I challenged that. And my main issue is how do you know that the solar farm is using what they say the solar farm is producing? There's an assumption. And of course, when you see zero input into the utility, and there's an assumption that you've produced, I don't know, 100 kilowatts, or let's just say it's a 100 kilowatt farm, we've produced 100 kilowatts, delivered that to the plant. So you talked about metering earlier, but I'm led to believe there's some utility providers, such as Synergy, that actually do that as part of their bread and butter. So they tell you how much you've contributed to the grid. Yet I'm currently using a linter that don't provide that service. So I'm just interested to know what others have done or are doing, or if they have the same issue.
Yeah, Cam, I do understand what you're talking about. That it is variable as to what levels of metering and monitoring you can get, but essentially most solar providers will be able to point you either in the right direction or provide it themselves, and that's a form of a metering service essentially, which will provide you with a measure of how much your solar system is producing and also exactly how much of it's exporting to the grid. So that should be available to you. I'm not sure why that isn't available at this stage, but you should be able to, it'll do that for you.
Sorry, Roger. So to clarify, I'm familiar with what we're producing. I see that every day, and I get performance emailed, and so we use Fronis as a tool that is part of the installation. So I've got that. Maybe call me skeptical or whatnot, but there's a ROI on that investment, and I'm trying to measure that performance at its infancy, because part of the contract is that there's an expectation that they deliver an outcome, and if they fail to deliver that outcome based on the projections, then there's a little wriggle room. But if it's a long way out, then I need to be satisfied that we're getting our bang for our buck.
So on a generally, sorry Cam, I just want to test a couple of things with you. On a nice day, are you getting the sorts of outputs that you think you should be getting? That is a good sunny day?
Yes.
Okay. Are you getting less generation on days that aren't as applicable? In other words, it might be cloudy or it might have some issues?
Yeah, there is a bit of that. Part of my issue, and again, it's probably my skepticism coming out, but part of my issue is that I believe we're actually producing more than we use. Like, I'll go back a step. I know the plant will suck up as much as we could produce, because it's a small plant. It's only 100 kilowatt. But on days that we're not producing, i.e. weekends, I'm reasonably, I know we run, and we're slightly different to another bigger plants. I mean, we're processing 700,000 a year, but it's not a big processing plant as such, and therefore our refrigeration component isn't huge. We don't do boning currently, so the demands on our plant, particularly when not in use, are very low. And my expectation is that when we have a nice sunny day, that we'll actually be contributing more to the grid than we are. And whilst it's not about, I mean, you get bugger all when you give to the grid anyway. It's not about that. It's more about wanting to be satisfied that what the I guess the installation promise is there or thereabouts. And I'm finding it difficult I mean, I think I can get there, but it's jumping through a whole lot of hoops to try and paint this picture that yes, we are delivering. So I think what I'm getting from you is there's opportunity to perhaps measure what's coming into our site from a solar farm, because there's only an assumption. All I get from Fronis is this is how much we've produced. I don't get this is how much our plant has taken off solar.
Oh, I see.
Yep.
So essentially,
And
the
because the other trade-off there is that I'm not really seeing the same reduction in energy costs. And I appreciate there's a whole lot of other different things, such as utilities, unit costs vary, or well, some may. So yeah, I was just interested to understand if any others have a similar problem with a new solar installation.
Well, just before you go on, Roger, with next steps, is there anyone else in attendance that would like to comment on that? I mean, have they got a comment about that quandary, which is, you know, understanding how the energy that's being generated is being utilised across your plant? Anyone got a comment about that, or any experience they'd like to share?
Carl?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment on that. So yeah, definitely, you know, you need a meter on the output of that solar farm. I'm not sure if you're running under an export agreement or a non-export agreement. From what you've said, Cam, I'm assuming it's probably non-export. And so under those conditions in the weekend when the plant doesn't have much load and the solar farm can't push out electrons to the network, the inverters will have to throttle back. And so it'll throttle back its generation, which you won't necessarily see unless you're looking at the data produced by that solar farm. But yeah, certainly, we need to have a meter on the output of that solar farm as well as looking at the NIMI data for your plant, your meatworks.
Yep. Yeah. So it's a bit of a high-level energy balance, really. Roger.
So, thanks, Carl. Cam, you went to green on your mic. You want to say anything?
Oh, no, it was just a thank you to Carl. That is useful.
Yeah. I don't know if you have export limiters on your system either. That's a possibility.
Yeah, well, I mean, I picked up on 2 points there, and to be fair, I'm not sure if I have either. So that's something I can explore.
They're usually easy to see. Look in your switchboard. They'll be actually called export limiters.
Roger, I'm a lover, not a fighter. I wouldn't know what I'm looking at.
All right. Well, look, given where we are in the time frame, I think that's an opportunity, Cam, to send Amanda or directly to Roger a bit of a follow-up series of questions there, and we'd be happy to investigate a little further for you. So it could be roger.horwood at HORWOOD, roger.horwood at energetics, ENERGETICS, as in here somewhere, .com.au, or flick it to Amanda if you prefer, and she'll pass it on, whichever way you prefer to do it. And we can continue on that discussion, I think, after the session. All right, any further questions from anyone?
Before you go on, Carl's put a couple of things in the chat. Carl, would you like to raise those directly?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Yeah, it's probably a bit of a long-winded question, but and probably one for Roger and Phil. But I guess just kind of, the red meat process, and we know a lot about energy efficiency and refrigeration, our thermal systems and things like that. And we went through this patch during the Clean Technology Investment Program, where a lot of abattoirs implemented biogas plants in the form of covered anaerobic lagoons. Yep. And that's, all of that stuff's big, capital intensive, and quite transformational. At the moment, though, we're kind of coming into this patch where there's an absence of kind of funding programs or funding programs that are clear. Gas prices have reduced significantly, but still those projects are really capital intensive with civil works and sometimes high risk as well. The government recently released their low emissions energy technology roadmap. Is Energetics seeing any specific benefit in that approach for red meat processes in the future to help drive some of that transformational change?
I think it's coming. I think the bigger changes that we're going to see into the future will be when we start to get a little bit cheaper in the electricity. I think that'll be the area that if we can get cheap electricity available, then we'll start to see the transformation or more electrification of things even like heat recovery systems in heat pumps, those sorts of things. As you know, Carl, we're working on a heat pump system, a feasibility for a malting plant at the moment, but I know that there's been probably 2 studies done in red meat processing to look at the potential of using heat pumps. They're still very expensive, but if we could get very cheap electricity, we could actually get to the point where those become cost-effective projects. But I do see that this technology roadmap, it's going to basically be a bit of a directive, I think, for the arena and for CFC. They'll start redirecting a bit of money towards this particular roadmap, and hopefully that will open up opportunities for red meat processing in basically improving the use of energy on the sites, and as you say, into more capital intensive projects.
Thanks, Roger. I might just add one quick point to that. When you say high temperature heat pumps, are you talking about for hot water or steam or both?
Yes. Well, at the moment, most of it's testing it for hot water generation, but it can be up to about 90 degrees C. The use of heat pumps for generating steam is possible, but you start to get to the point where it's not as cost effective as doing it for using just hot water generation. You see, there's a bit of a limit to where you can get to with a heat pump at this point, but it's technically possible to do steam generation, and it has been done overseas. So the reality is, it's the technology's there, but the cost structures for our both the equipment and also for the cost of gas and electricity aren't right for us to get those projects to go forward.
And Carl, part of your comment there seemed to be around what the business drivers were as well. Were you alluding to that? Or was it just the technology?
Yeah, well, more so that, I guess, since those projects are very capital intensive, typically they're well beyond, a standard economic hurdle rate for a processor, I should think.
Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, that was more the comment. If we're going to make that change, there's probably other funding or assistance needed to make the change.
I suspect that there will be another program come through, Carl, at some point. There's been a lot of pressure put on the government to provide more funding for the next levels of transformation in the energy systems. So I expect it will happen, but if we get another CTIP or Clean Technology Investment Program where you can get up to 50% funding, that would be fantastic. That would get a lot of those projects going.
And it might be appropriate now, Matt Deegan, if you wanted to talk a little bit about any relevant PIP projects, just in terms of, we're looking at the funding and the feasibility question of some of these more strategic projects.
Just quickly, Bill, we're shoveling it out the door very quickly. So doing a lot of monitoring and services efficiencies. But the PIPs are open, and so we're doing quite a bit on that side of things. So encourage members to give us a call.
Okay, and look, I think on that basis, people like Cam, you alluded earlier to the idea of sharing, and I think Carl, you also sort of alluded to that as well. The PIPs are a great opportunity where there is some commonality. There's a common idea or opportunity, whether it be regional, whether it be based on the maturity of your site or the type of site. It doesn't have to be physically, you don't have to be physically near each other. There's an opportunity for sites to come together and share some of that PIP money for a common project. So keep that in mind, because it increases your buying power to a certain extent. Okie dokes. So I think we've probably pushed the time frame as far as we can. So thank you, Roger, for that information about the opportunities. I just want to encourage everyone once again, send us an email, flick Amanda a note. We're very happy to help you out with any further opportunities. We're here to help you progress your ideas, and you're getting access to a bit of energetics expertise at no fee. So well, certainly indirectly anyway. You know, it's an opportunity to assess feasibility. It's an opportunity to progress those ideas that you've got, or it might be checking on things, you know, the verification type activities that Cam alluded to. So feel free to give AMPC a call. We'll help you out where we can. And stay tuned for the next webinar on the 10th of June, where we'll spend a lot more time looking at those more strategic generation opportunities around solar and biomass boilers, etc. And Roger, again, will be hosting you for that particular webinar. Amanda, would you like to close out?
Thank you, Phil and Roger, for today's session. And thank you, everyone, for putting up with a few little technical glitches as we learn how these new systems work. It was great to see the interaction that we were able to get once we got a few mics and that happening. So thank you. That adds a lot more value to these sessions. So as Phil indicated, if you want any more information or want the Energetics contacts and you can't find them, please feel free to talk to Matt Deegan or myself, and we will get you in contact with them. Also, if you have any ideas around PIPs, Matt Deegan is the person to talk to in terms of energy and sustainability projects. So as we finish off this webinar now, you should get an email sent to you with a little survey. It would be fantastic if you could actually complete that survey for us. It just gives us feedback so that we can continue to improve these as we move forward. Thanks very much for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.